Darkness for Darkness, a story by Micah Edwards. Both parents bolted awake at the cry of terror from their son's room. Their adrenaline-fueled fear shifted into exasperated anger when they made out the words. Monster. Monster. Grousing, the father lurched out of bed and pulled on a robe. That kid, I swear. Don't yell at him, honey. The screams were continuing and growing even more shrill. I thought it was a real problem, like I'm going to have when I fall asleep at work tomorrow. He shuffled down the hallway and pushed open the door to his son's room. Okay, what? He froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in shock. His son was crouched in a corner of the room, next to his paltry nightlight, pressing himself against the wall hard enough to crack it. Tears poured down from his face as copiously as the blood from his torn ankle, but the boy seemed not to notice either one. Monster, he gibbered, pointing frantically toward his bed. His panicked brain had no room left for any other concepts. Monster. There was no other word for it. Something utterly inhuman was attempting to pull its way free from under the bed, clawing desperately at the shadows of the room. It moved in a snarl of teeth and rage. It looked not like a nightmare, but like the very concept of nightmares itself. It was built of fear, made sharp and weaponized, and it was coming closer with every passing instant. In shock and terror, the man almost closed the door. Almost, he left his son to face the horror alone. Then an instinct almost as deep as self-preservation roared up to defend his family, overriding his traitorous right arm and shouldering the door fully open. The thing could not exist in the light. It did not flinch back as the hallway light flooded the room. It simply was no longer in those spaces, and the man was directly next to the switch that controlled the lights for the room. One flick, one instant, and it was gone. For a brief second, it poured out of the crack in the closet door. Infinite eyes dripping to the ceiling as claws scored the woodwork. But the father ripped the door open to reveal nothing but clothes and piles of toys. He ran to his son, scooping him from the floor, heedless of the blood and urine now soaking his robe. He screamed for his wife as he ran for the front door of the house, only to stop dead as he saw the night peering in from outside. The dark, forbidding night. His wife found him huddled in the hallway, beneath the chandelier, cradling their crying son. What happened? What was it? Is he okay? What happened to his ankle? Her husband answered none of her rapid-fire questions. His gaze was fixed on the chandelier. One of the bulbs was burned out. He seemed unable to tear his eyes away. The scene was playing out all across the city. 911 was alive with calls. The hospitals were flooded with people nearly catatonic with shock, except that they screamed endlessly if they were taken away from the light. Gunfire sounded as police were dispatched. They had not even made it out of the station parking lot. Something disjointed was creeping under the cars, scuttling from shadow to shadow. In the flash of the gun muzzle, it was not there, but the darkness flowed with fangs as soon as the brief light passed. Floodlights blazed and the lot was empty except for panicked policemen. Those who had not seen it questioned their colleagues' sanity. Those who had seen it knew that it was more real than any terror they had ever experienced before. All around the city, lights sprang to life in houses and apartment buildings. Even the offices downtown lit up as night workers flipped switches in fear, desperate to expand the areas of light around themselves. The central power station, unprepared to cope with the unprecedented load, stuttered and failed. In a horrifying cascade, the city went dark. Chaos erupted. Families fled to their cars for the safety of the dome lights, only to see razor fingers whispering at them from inside of the air vents. Wisps of agony brushed across their heels from beneath the seats. Many drivers crashed, unwilling to put their feet down long enough to operate the brakes. Car horns blared from hundreds of wrecked vehicles, adding to the discord. Fires began to burn as thousands of panicked citizens all feverishly sought any source of light. Even those fortunate enough to have fireplaces did not make use of them, unwilling to lean in beneath whatever terrors might stretch down from the blackness of the chimney. Furniture was set alight. Sofas, armchairs, anything that would catch fire easily. Unfortunately, the fires produced more than light. The burning substances gave off a thick black smoke that roiled with torment and bones as the shadow monster tried to pull free. Those who had set the fires fled, leaving them to spread and consume entire houses, even neighborhoods. There were too many for the firefighters to stop, even had they been allowed to. Instead, the responders were attacked as they began to spray down the fires, beaten and bludgeoned for reducing the light. They retreated to safety as the flames raged. A pall began to form over the city, a gray film that blotted out the stars and tasted of graves. Darkness spread. The monster occupied every shadow, every sunken doorway, every alley. It ripped from 10,000 locations at once, bursting forth in a pustulant tarry tide. It tore through metal and stone as easily as flesh, leaving shrieking devastation in its wake. Nothing stopped or even slowed it except for the light. It could not be where the light was, but it was everywhere else. The monster poured forth as the city cowered before it. It was the promised loss at the end of all things. It was the failure of life, given rotting flesh. It was fear, and it was afraid. It slaughtered heedlessly as it ran, as mindless as any cow in a stampede. It burned through its reserves of energy, stolen and hoarded from billions of human lives across tens of thousands of years, throwing it all away in a frantic attempt to escape. It rammed itself into any space it could find, pulling itself free from every shadow, nails and spikes attempting to anchor itself to reality, to stab into the light itself, and tear free of its shadow dimension. Behind it came something else, something worse. Where the monster fled, he moved calmly, smooth and deadly as a shark. He carved off pieces like a butcher flensing a carcass. He ate the nightmare raw and hungered for more. Every exposed piece was in danger, and to the hunter, everything in the shadow was exposed. Larger and larger the monster made itself, forcing its way through. It had always before confined itself to flutters in the darkness, slivers seen through darkened forests or distant doors. Now it held nothing back, crashing through every shadow imaginable. As the smoke embraced the city, it reached through the cracks in the skyline itself, looming over the buildings in a terrifying apocalypse. It was tenuous and shot through with holes as various lights stabbed into it, but it drove the smoke before it and used it to blot out the offensive light. It flowed into the city in a cataract, wrapped in darkness and smog, crushing cars beneath its bulk. The city screamed. It was not enough. Knives stabbed at it from behind, unmaking and unraveling it. The more energy it expended, the more the hunter drew from it. No size was large enough, no space safe. It wailed, a sound that shattered minds like they were glass. Cornered, it turned to fight, but the hunter was inside of it. It tore away its own substance, and the hunter fed on the damage it did to itself, growing stronger with every cut. Sinew and tendons and blood fell away beneath the hunter's knives and ravenous mouth. The monster died as it had existed, in terror and darkness. The shadows in the city ceased to pulse with horrible motion. The fires and fear and madness still raged, but the thing that was causing them to spiral was gone. Elsewhere, a thin, impossible distance away, the hunter flexed his fingers experimentally. He could feel where he needed to be. He was almost strong enough to tear the hole open. Like the beast, it would take everything he had gathered to break through, to make even the tiniest pinprick. But once he had achieved that, he would have it all back and more. Home, he whispered, thinking of the limitless energy that awaited him, of what he had once been. The sound drifted over the city, a soft susurrus that briefly drowned out the sirens and blaring car horns. The moment of deadly calm was, somehow, worse than the noise.